Hey everyone, it's T. So it's that time of year again. I just recently watched The House on Netflix, and it kind of reminded me of one of my favorite horror books, which is House of Leaves. I realized that I really just like when like a house, an apartment, a place of living and being is just evil. Just fits the horror genre really well to say this place that is supposed to be safe and comforting is actively trying to kill you. So I wanted to talk about three different movies: 1408, The House, and Hereditary. I feel like each of these movies has its own kind of spin on hostile architecture, not in the like sociologist way, but in like the architecture is hostile. So let's start with 1408. 1408 is a 2007 horror movie starring John Cusack and Samuel Jackson. It's about a writer who has most of his success writing about haunted houses, but he really doesn't like that. He's largely a skeptic, and then he comes to a haunted hotel room and stuff goes down. 1408 is probably the most literal version of this trope. John Cusack's character is expecting a ghost or a poltergeist or something like that. And actually, the hotel room is just, in Samuel Jackson's words,
It's an evil fucking room.
and it does just what you'd expect from the microgenre. It creates hallucinations, it traps him, and it plays on his trauma. The one difference that I noticed in comparing the three, it doesn't employ what I would call impossible architecture. You know, the hotel room is the suite, the bathroom, maybe the ledge and the window to outside, also maybe the vent above. It never makes itself bigger or smaller to a degree. It doesn't become a maze. Though there are points in the movie where windows or hallways disappear, I would classify that more as hallucinations just because of everything else that is happening in the movie. The focus on the room messing with guests' minds is so prevalent throughout that it's hard to make a case that things are actually disappearing or reappearing. And unlike when this kind of genre takes place in a house or an apartment building, its main method of disorientation is to trap its characters, to confuse and upset them so that they feel they need to escape. And in 1408's case, there's only one way to do that. This is unlike the house in Hereditary, where the house doesn't necessarily want them to want to escape. So let's talk about The House. The House is an anthology movie on Netflix. Really good stop motion animation. Would recommend. The first two stories I'm going to talk about in this video, I feel like the last story is not necessarily along the same lines of like the horror genre, even though it's just as enjoyable. But essentially, it's about a very cursed home throughout time and I think reality. Each resident has some compulsion to serve the house or to make the house serve them, to greater and lesser degrees of success. When the house is first built, the parents are bewitched by it. I think the overall design of the house really establishes its aliveness. One of the first things that I really noticed about it was the eye wallpaper. This wallpaper is shown throughout the house and really establishes that the family is being watched at all times. But the house is also fed through the fireplace, through the family's old furniture, through the family itself. The main antagonist seems to be an evil architect, but we as the audience are never sure if he's an actual person, a ghost, is he the house itself? I also love that the family is so consumed by wanting those indicators of wealth, a big house with fancy adornments, that they are literally consumed by it. The second part of the anthology paints the house itself as evil, but also shows the effect that it has on its new resident. It doesn't have the kind of impossible architecture from the first anthology either. Instead, it has invaders, which are an interesting take on the kind of like living, breathing house kind of thing. The house houses these living creatures that are almost like a plague or an infection. That one freaked me out, like intensely. The main character has renovated the entire house to make it resemble a very modern house, which directly contrasts with the fact that it is disgusting on the inside. You know, it's very interesting to have also a rat be the main character in that, because rats are generally associated with like pestilence, almost like the house is disgusting inside and out, and you can't really hide it, no matter how much you slap a coat of paint on it. Like, it's literally within the foundation. That's not something that you can change. And it really goes along with the actual character as well, because we find out that he is not as put together as we think in the beginning. I won't go into the third story for reasons that I already said, but it still establishes the house as kind of its own character with its own needs and wants, and definitely a control over the main character in that story. Lastly, we'll talk about Hereditary. So this one differs slightly from the other two in that the house itself is not necessarily evil. Instead, I wanted to talk about how the architecture itself is used to confuse and unnerve the audience. I also really wanted to talk about the miniatures. It's not something to really focus on. There's a whole bunch of other stuff that really happens, but it's a really important part of the story. You know, these characters are not given the jobs that they have for no reason. I really love the way that the miniatures are used to show theme and also as a kind of, almost like a Greek chorus. It like, there's a different word for it, but kind of in the way of a Greek chorus, where it's like summarizing all the things that are happening, except in a very uncanny, disturbing way. So Annie tends to use the miniatures as a way to kind of relive her own trauma, to be separate from it, to be removed from it. She says it within the movie itself, that her daughter's accident, she sculpted it via an unbiased point of view, which isn't necessarily true. She's trying to use the miniatures as a way to exhibit control and almost like a godliness, like hand upon the situations. You know, it's life as she sees it, so it can't necessarily be a completely objective point of view. She makes her daughter's accident, she makes the art gallery that's rushing her for a piece, but what I really wanted to focus on was the models of the house. If you pay close attention, the house on the inside really reflects the models themselves, the models of the house. But the house on the outside doesn't. It looks much too different and almost too like small, like the wrong shape to house all of those rooms. I'm pretty sure this was purposeful. In the same way that the first story in the house created new rooms to confuse and kind of cause despair within especially the kids, the Hereditary house is purposefully too large for its frame, something that doesn't really make sense. And you know, thematically that's significant just because there's so much within that house that is not being spoken about, that is kind of brushed over, that is scary and sad and angering. It just feels like it's going to like explode. Like they could have gotten the house and then built the models around the outside of the house, but they didn't, and that's why I feel it's purposeful. Or maybe they didn't and it was a mistake and I'm just talking, but the inside of the house, they obviously built certain aspects of it for the purpose of the film. You can see inside of the walls when characters go into different rooms. It reminds me of kind of like a play in that way, but also kind of drives forth the inorganicness of it. Like especially in these opening and ending shots, it kind of feels like a dollhouse. And that makes sense with the idea of the miniatures, but also makes sense in the idea that the family are literally just kind of being toyed with by the cult that's following them. Yeah, I really just like how the design of the house really shows that even though the house itself is not evil, it houses evil. The subgenre shows that a house doesn't need to be haunted for it to be scary, it can exhibit a level of control over the people that live there, maybe financially or status-wise or family-wise. I always find it interesting, the different views that people have on the subject. And that each of these movies has something to do with grief, either for another person or for an idea. I love comparing and looking at the through lines for these kinds of movies. But yeah, let me know if you also noticed any of the things I pointed out or noticed them in other films. I will catch you next time. Thanks.